Good evening, everyone, and welcome to all of you who are in the audience or to those of you watching at home to tonight's forum, Housing Hot Topics. This forum is the result of a collaboration of 3 different groups: Housing for All, the Acton Community Housing Corporation, and the Acton Area League of Women Voters. I am Marge Kennedy, a member of Housing for All and the League. Since January 2018, a group of community stakeholders has been meeting to discuss current plans in Acton, as well as noting the unmet needs for seniors, those with disabilities, and others in our community. Our deliberations have been aided by Dana Lewinter of CHAPA, Citizens Housing and Planning Association. Over the course of the last year, the group has been working to build support for housing production and affordable housing here in Acton. The group of stakeholders has now become Housing for All. Housing for All seeks to work with residents and others who care deeply about Acton and want to join us in assuring that our town is a welcoming community. We are sponsoring this forum tonight as the first in a series intended to inform you about various housing hot topics, beginning with this evening's presentation about accessory dwelling units and tiny houses. Several of us in the Housing for All group are members of the Acton Area League of Women Voters. The League has a rich tradition of supporting programs, policies, and regulations to address housing needs. So it's a perfect fit for the League to co-sponsor tonight's forum. So I'm pleased to welcome you all. I hope you will learn more about accessory dwelling units, what is allowed here in Acton, in Acton right now, how ADUs can help to meet the needs of many Acton residents, what will be proposed at April town meeting. You will also hear about how tiny homes are built. There will be time for your questions and your comments, and we look forward to hearing from you. So thank you for joining us as we learn and talk about such important housing hot topics. And now I turn things over to Lauren Morton, who is our moderator this evening.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming out on this cold evening to learn about accessory dwelling units and tiny houses. This is one of many alternatives to meet the needs in our community for people that cannot have difficulty paying market rates and market housing costs in our community. So first of all, Bob Van Meter, who is the chair of Housing for All, is ill tonight, so I am taking his place. So bear with me, and we wish Bob well, but bear with me as I go through the sequence tonight. The first speaker that I'd like to introduce is Ray Jacoby. Ray is the chair of the Acton Planning Board, and he's here tonight to tell you all about a proposed zoning bylaw that will allow separate accessory dwelling units next to one's home or behind one's home. Ray has been on the planning board for over 10 years. He is now chair. He's lived in Acton umpteenth years, raised 3 children here. And Ray, take it away.
Okay. So, should I get up to the lectern?
Oh, also, I did want to let people know that this evening's presentations are being recorded. We're going to go through all 3 speakers, and at the end, there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers. Thank you.
This is better. Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. Okay, the presentation I'm giving tonight is actually going to be some background information as well as reviewing a bylaw or a change to the bylaws being proposed and will be at town meeting. In April, 1st and 2nd, we have this proposed amendment for accessory apartments. And again, it's an amendment. Accessory apartments are currently allowed in Acton by right. So we're not proposing that we do them. They already exist. Okay, the intent of this article is to amend the existing to allow for newly constructed detached buildings. Those are currently not allowed. Okay. So this. Okay, now, as background, what does a current zoning bylaw? And the number one just means there's 2 slides, by the way. So, right now, we allow by right an attached accessory apartment per lot in all residential zoning districts. The maximum size can be 50% of the principal dwelling unit up to a limit of 800 square feet. Okay, so if you have 1,000 square feet, you can only do 500, you can't do 800 as an example. Okay, no more than 2 bedrooms, separate entrances are required, no exterior staircases. Again, this is what's currently on the books. Ground floor apartments must be adaptable for accessibility. No additional driveway is allowed. Room for 1 additional parking space is required. Has to be owner occupied. Let me emphasize owner occupied. So someone can't go in, buy a house, sit there and start renting it out. It can't be an Airbnb or anything like that. It has to be owner occupied. The principal resident or the accessory unit, one of the two has to be owner occupied. No separate units, so someone can't put the apartment and sell it to somebody else. So it's deeded and owned by the current property owner. A special permit is required for apartment conversion of existing accessory building, like you have a barn or a carriage house, and you'd like to convert it to an accessory unit. You can, but only by special permit. Okay, what's proposed in this new bylaw? Again, it's to allow by right 1 newly constructed detached. The principal thing to focus, detached. So this allows it so it doesn't have to be attached to the house, okay? And again, the additional rules, the detached accessory must be on the side or the rear of the principal dwelling. There was some debate on this, which I can address later. Maximum floor is 500 square feet. Is what's proposed. And it requires a permanent foundation. So this will impact, for example, tiny homes. If you want to put them on a trailer, they would not meet the bylaw requirement, as an example, okay? Now, what's important I want to highlight, the applicable existing rules still apply. Not more than 1 apartment, not more than 2 bedrooms, no separate ownership of the apartment unit, no separate driveway. So we're not changing any other the fundamental rules. The principal difference is the detached. And why are they being proposed? This bylaw came up at town meeting, at a special town meeting a couple of years ago. Quite honestly, there's been a groundswell of community demand saying, we want to see this. We want to brought to town meeting, okay? Again, it's intended to address a number of things we've already talked about, kind of housing diversity, flexibility to accommodate family members who are aging or otherwise. I've been in town for 31 years. I have friends, I used to live in Northwire. I have friends now that get to the point saying, I'd like to stay in town, this would be great. I might do a detached accessory unit, I'll move into it, and my kids will move into my house, or I'll rent the house out so I can stay in town. That's the sort of accommodation we're talking. Again, the rental options for seniors, so putting aging in place, which is what I was just talking about. Again, I want to emphasize this is not to turn it over to people who can go and develop and run amok. Okay, I think that's really important. This is addressing needs of housing in town that citizens have been coming to us and saying, we need this. The current regulations are burdensome and are getting in the way of us meeting our needs. And again, this last one that came up, we just had a meeting on this at the planning board last week. And I think it's important for the audience that a typical planning board meeting, unless it's a development that I'm in a butter, we might get 2 people show up. We had 20 people at this meeting. We would have had more because we had to postpone it from the week before because we didn't have a quorum. That was overwhelmingly in support of saying, we want to talk about this. They had some comments about other things. The board, to be quite candid, wasn't going to put this forward. For those of you in attendance saw we had to work to say, this should go to town meeting, let the town decide. Okay, so I really want to emphasize, this is not something the planning board says, oh yeah, let's take it again. No, we're being responsive to the community. Okay, here's an example just quickly. On the left-hand side, you can see that back part of the house is an accessory apartment. The one on the right would be a detached. You can see it's on the side and the back. Some data, again, when we were kind of doing our deliberations, we were kind of looking at right now, the estimated number, and these are numbers that the planning department put together for me. Currently, we have roughly in town 15 to 20 accessory apartments. We're a town of 20,000 people. That's not even statistically significant. So I want to. There have been 3 new accessory apartments in the last 2 years. Now, we may have had more if the regulation's a little bit different, but just to put it, there's been 2 to 3. This is some data, actually, some from the Board of Selectmen was at a housing forum where we picked up some other neighboring communities in Ipswich. There have been 61 new accessory apartments since 2004. Newton, there's been 23 new accessory apartments in 2017. This is a phenomenon that we're facing not just in our town, and to accommodate people's growing needs. Here's another chart. Again, just to kind of give you some frame of reference of what would change. The existing one allows, and it's attached to the proposed zoning would allow in a detached garage carrier if it was built prior to 2019, and allows in addition now new construction. The big difference right now, this would allow new construction to be detached. Today, if it's detached, you have to have an existing structure that you can convert by special permit. This would allow a homeowner by right to construct a separate unit up to 500 square feet. Again, what stays the same? There's no more than one accessory apartment on a lot. Owner must reside in the property. The apartment cannot be sold or transferred to separate ownership. So again, this is kind of where you have the protection in town. Minimum one parking space needs to be added, and no more than one driveway. So you can't have an additional driveway being put in. It has to be an existing driveway. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm going to turn the mic over back to Lauren. Actually, I should say, if there's any questions, during the question and answer period, I can address them.
Okay, thank you very much, Ray. I did want to tell you that there are handouts on the table. There's one handout that is from the group tonight, and there's a private citizen handout as well. So I would like to now introduce Larry Field. Larry comes to us from the Smart Growth Alliance. He is the Deputy Director. He joined the Smart Growth Alliance in February of 2015 as Deputy Director. He focuses on the Alliance's policy and legislative advocacy. Before joining the Alliance, Larry served as Director of the Massachusetts Permit Regulatory Office under the Secretary of Housing and Economic Development in 2014, and as Director of Strategic Initiatives in the Undersecretary's Office at the Department of Housing and Community Development, 2011 to 2014. The Permit Regulatory Office includes the MassWorks Infrastructure Grants Program, the 43D and 43E Expedited Permitting Programs, and regional planning initiatives. In both positions, Larry was the day-to-day manager of the Commonwealth's Housing That Works initiative, including the goal of producing 10,000 multifamily homes a year through 2020, and particularly near public transit, city and town centers, and employment. Before coming to state government, Larry practiced law for 22 years and managed a real estate partnership. He graduated from Harvard Law School and studied economics at the University of Pennsylvania. Larry is going to present about accessory dwelling units. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you. First, I have to apologize for not asking you to shorten my bio. It's from the website. Websites have to have everything. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. Let me tell you what I'm going to try to accomplish in my presentation. Just generally to provide some context about accessory dwelling units. You are lucky enough to be in a municipality that already has a fairly liberal ADU ordinance. So even though there haven't been many created in the town, you're aware of the concept and have been comfortable with it. And it's really great to hear that there's a strong sentiment in the town for at least looking at expanding the scope of the existing ordinance. So I want to start with a few slides here about the Massachusetts Smart Growth Alliance so you know what our perspective is. We are an organization that's composed of 9 alliance members, formed in 2003, and some of the founding members include CHAPA, where Dana works. Bob Van Meter was the head of the LISC Boston office. They're one of our members. And MAPC, which is the regional planning agency for this area, is also one of our founding members. We have something called the Great Neighborhoods Campaign, which is designed to provide a policy advocacy on Beacon Hill and in the whoever is governor on smart growth issues. And this coalition is much broader than the alliance itself and includes business groups, planning groups, and others throughout the state. These are the 4 principles of the campaign, just so you know where we're coming from. It is a focus on housing choice, on livable communities, on planning for the future, and on predictable permitting. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time defining accessory dwelling units, but this is in a slide basically what they are. And as Ray noted, they cannot be sold separately from the primary home. As with your ordinance, they're smaller than the primary home, and they can either be within the structure or detached. This slide is useful in showing visually the basic 3 configurations, starting with the American flag home. That ADU is entirely within the structure. If you're standing in the street looking at it, you wouldn't know that there's an ADU there. The one from California is a detached ADU in the rear, and in the drawing there, it depicts an expansion of the footprint of the primary home, an addition that creates the ADU. So why do accessory dwelling units matter? And as Ray pointed out, the primary feature is the flexibility for the homeowner. And that becomes very important if you are in a home for decades and your life situation changes while you own that home. And, we all know that it is fairly typical for there to be a household that starts out with small children. The children go off to do other things. The homeowner or homeowners may be aging and have changes in their physical ability to get upstairs, to do the things they used to do. And so in order to provide the flexibility for that homeowner, it's useful to have this accessory unit. And it's particularly important if the homeowner loves the community that they live in and they want to stay there. They don't want to have to move to an institution. They don't want to have to move to another town which has a small rental unit that they want. They want to be in the place where they have chosen to make their life. And an accessory dwelling unit provides the flexibility in several different ways. One is that it can be used as a place for a family member or a caregiver to live. so that they can have the comfort of having someone who can help them, but also provide that person with some privacy so that they have a life of their own. It can also be a place where they rent to someone and get an income. And with many retirees having a fixed income that is, especially with property taxes, perhaps something that they struggle with, it's nice to have that income. And then the third possibility is that they move into the smaller accessory apartment. They're downsizing, but they're downsizing in their own home. And they can then rent out the main structure and get an income. It could be a family member who moves into that main structure and they continue in the smaller apartment. Now, an aspect of accessory apartments, which is not part of this flexibility theme, is the idea of it being part of a housing production strategy. And it is part of a coherent strategy, but it, as Ray pointed out with some of the numbers you saw, it is not a big way of producing homes. It is a way to produce a modest number of additional homes that typically can be rented at an affordable way. Whether it's the main structure that's rented out, or especially if it's the smaller accessory unit, it can be what some in the field call naturally affordable. It is less expensive than the places that may otherwise be available. Accessory dwelling units are increasingly popular, and this Boston Globe article is just an example of that. So quickly about the regulatory structure, cities and towns are the ones who make the main decisions about ADUs. These are some of the things that a city or town can regulate. Are they allowed at all? What types of homes are eligible, and what is the particular factors that a municipality uses to decide which homes are eligible or not? Where is the ADU within the structure or outside of it? Who can occupy? And then finally, there can be lots of other decisions that are made by the city or town. And so this particular amendment that is under consideration is one aspect of the things that a city or town would regulate. It used to be, before World War II, that it was fairly typical for there to be multi-generational homes. And no one thought anything about having an ADU within a home. It wasn't even really a big policy issue. But after World War II, as we've gotten to really more focus on single-family homes, especially with larger lots, there was a sense of a single-family home is a single household with a couple that has kids, and that's the conventional way in which the regulatory structure recognized a household. In the last 20 years, there has been a liberalizing trend around the country, with more and more cities and towns trying to provide an ADU option for the community. I can't speak to everywhere in the country, but when I point out a few examples in Massachusetts, one of the interesting features is that it often starts out with a community wrestling with, should we allow them at all? And they put their toe in the water and say, well, we'll provide a little bit of options for homeowners. And then 5, 8, 10 years pass, and they find that there are only a few ADUs that have been created, and they feel more comfortable with expanding the scope of the ADU ordinance. And so that is something that was typical, for example, in Newton, in Lexington, in Ipswich, all three of which are communities now that have pretty liberal ADU provisions. Last year, our organization, in connection with CHAPA and MAPC, two of the state quasi-public housing agencies, and a couple of real estate trade associations, commissioned a researcher to do research on zoning regulations in the 100 cities and towns surrounding Boston. It's the remainder of the MAPC region. And one of the things that she was studying was accessory dwelling units. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about her study, what she found on the region as a whole, and particularly the Magic subregion. And Acton is one of the 13 communities in the Magic subregion. There are 37 of the 100 cities and towns that allow ADUs and have no rental restriction. So if there are 2 units, the main one and the accessory one, one of them can be rented out. It's very typical to have an owner-occupant requirement. In the Magic subregion, 11 of the 13, and they can be rented out. There are 31 municipalities in the MAPC region that do not allow ADUs to be rented. And in the Magic subregion, that includes Boxborough and Maynard. And then there are 32 communities in the MAPC region that do not allow ADUs. The Magic subregion has none of those. So you are in a subregion. Your surrounding communities are all ones that have fairly low. So you are very much in a liberal, in this context, a subregion that's very liberal about it. Subregion. So production of ADUs is an interesting question. As Ray pointed out, there have been very few that have been created in Acton. Our researcher included Acton in the study and in the production numbers. The ones that have the most in eastern Massachusetts are Ipswich, Newton, and Lexington. 2 of them were in this study. Ipswich is outside the region. And, but their numbers are not very large. So since Newton created a liberal ordinance in 2017, they've had 23 that have been created. And Newton is a community that I believe has 32,000 year-round houses, so it's much larger than Acton. Others in the subregion that have produced more than Acton would be both Concord and Carlisle. But still, the numbers are pretty small. I think the numbers are 12 and 10 or 13 and 10. And as I said, these Newton, Lexington, and Ipswich are all good examples. The handout that was at the table there has a comparison of the Newton and Ipswich provisions and also has information about their particular production. So before I close, I do want to point out quickly some legislation that could be passed and would make a difference to communities that are considering ADUs. One of them is Governor Baker's housing choice legislation, which was announced about 10 days ago. And it would change the voting threshold for zoning changes of certain kinds. And they're enumerated in the bill. One of them is an accessory dwelling ordinance that either does that by right or by special permit. And then there are 2 bills that we've asked legislators to file. One of them would make it by right for an accessory dwelling unit to be created if it's within the main structure of a home and meets certain other criteria. And the other bill relates to tiny homes. And it would amend the state building code so that if a tiny home was on a foundation, it would be provided for in the state building code. And I should say as a footnote, since we're going to have some more discussion about tiny homes, that a tiny home can be a detached dwelling unit, accessory dwelling unit, or it can be something that's independent of another unit. So it is part of the ADU conversation, but also is a housing type of its own. So with that, thank you very much, and at the end, we'll take questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Larry. That was very comprehensive. Right now, I'd like to introduce Isa Bauer, who's the project manager and lead designer of Tiny House Northeast. With Tiny House Northeast, Isa's custom design work and project management encompasses all aspects of tiny houses, from design building for the aging, disabled, chemical sensitive to materials, choices, and resourcing, from space efficiency to utility systems, and from municipal zoning to off-grid option challenges. She's afforded the opportunity to communicate with hundreds of anxious but hopeful tiny house home buyers and do-it-yourselfers. Broadly informed on the multifaceted subject of tiny houses, Isa has presented in dozens of Massachusetts, Maine, and New Hampshire libraries, schools, and professional organizations from Seattle to Providence. Isa earned an MA in Regional Economic and Social Development with a focus in sustainable development at UMass Lowell. In graduate school, she spent much of her time researching and sharing information about smart growth, green building, renewable energy, and other sustainability topics via the radio show she produced called The Long View. Upon graduating, she focused on the development of green-focused and building trades businesses. Isa has served on both her local town of Salisbury, Mass's planning board and as the chairperson of its energy committee. Thank you, Isa. I know, I'm sorry. I had to tell the whole story so people know where you're coming from.
Thank you. Oh, boy. I didn't know it read that long.
Let me put the mic on for you.
I didn't know that it read that long. So, excuses. Thank you for coming out and hearing all of these perspectives. I think I forgot the clicker, actually. Thank you. Okay. Well, my portion of the presentation has a little bit less to do with statistics and numbers, qualitative information or quantitative information. But as the lead designer and project manager at Tiny House Northeast, I fielded hundreds of inquiries, both from do-it-yourselfers and people who want ADUs and those that we design build for. And so from that perspective, I do come with a lot of numbers in my head, but I won't be presenting that so much. So what is a tiny house is a bit arbitrary, honestly, but the idea is that commonly it's thought of as about 500 to 600 square feet of residence that's on a foundation, which is really what we're talking about this evening, though I'm going to clarify a bit the other type. The other type being about half that, around 250 square feet, and those being on wheels. So what we're really addressing tonight is that tiny house, this arbitrary number of about 500 or 600 square feet. Although we'll see that, you know, some ADUs have been in fact much more than that, especially if it's a percentage of a much larger house, right? So the tiny house in my realm is pretty different than a small house. Again, we're looking at about this many square feet, 500 to 600. Media portrays the tiny houses as an affordable option, and they're not necessarily so on a foot-by-foot basis, cost basis. The size suggests a mentality of minimalism and my space being outdoors. You know, you just don't have a big living room to watch movies and such, so it is a different mentality. And that's what media portrays as well. So, you know, I don't know if this is appropriate at a town meeting, but how many people have watched the cable TV shows with the tiny houses? Most of you? It looks like about 50-50. Yeah. So we're accustomed to thinking about this as a whole lifestyle, right? Now, the current trend, again, this is where my experience comes in, is that these hundreds of people that we've talked to in my library presentations and as customers, they have self-qualified. They really do come to us and ask. They might want to build themselves and just want information, but they are ready to give up almost everything that they have and live like that in the tiny house. Now, the real only difference, sole difference between one on wheels and a static tiny house, the stationary ones that we're talking about for the ADU, is that normally a tiny static or stationary house has to meet building code. No, it doesn't normally have to meet building code. It always has to meet building code. Every bit of it. The living space, the height of the ceilings, you know, the minimums for living space, the treads and the risers of the stairs, all of those things, energy efficiency, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas the ones on wheels don't. And that's a whole different story for another night. So the benefits of tiny house construction, we're going to say reduced building expense in the materials, but since everything is very compressed and compact, then not actually, because you just would still have all of the normal components of a kitchen, for example, right? All the plumbing, the electric, those things that make things expensive. Cluster friendly, very much so, as my colleague over here alluded to, and it can be less expensive to customize because you have smaller spaces to work with. So you're going to have shorter counter space, for example, that's going to accommodate the wheelchair or things like this. One thing that's very attractive, though, especially with the tiny houses on wheels, as people see them on the shows and in media, is that they fit in really nice into our architecture because they can be clad in clapboard or cedar shingles, you know, and look very, very nice with any sort of window configuration, et cetera. And by the way, I always think the North Shore is just the cat's pajamas, but it's beautiful here, and I could see you would appreciate the aesthetics. And easier to maintain, and really simply, you know, somebody who's able to get on a ladder and go up a few rungs can paint their own darn house and clean out the gutters, you know, if it's very, very tiny. This is a really nice thing. In fact, my great uncle was on the side of his 2-story house, way at the top, painting trim to the chagrin of my great aunt, and he made it down again. So people who are qualified for this size house, they love it. They really do. And we've had just hundreds, well, no, thousands of people come to see the buildings when we've gone to a home show or something. You know, we've always had tiny houses, so it may be a bit comfortable for us. We're so independent, and you know, we're independent folks. You know, we Yankees up here, and we like our separate houses. But in fact, all over the world, and still, you know, houses can be very, very small. A lot of our recent immigrants come from very, very small spaces, probably about 250 or 300 square feet. But they needn't be just boxes. They can be created and designed to fit in very nicely, again, into our aesthetic around here. And I have some more sort of Victorian embellishments up there, but that's fun stuff. And actually, a couple of those photos are from Asbury Grove in Hamilton. Does anyone know Asbury Grove? And Asbury Grove has many, many little seasonal cottages and also some year-round 400 square feet. I own one of them. 350 square feet I've had since I was 19 years old. When we're thinking about design, we're thinking very much about space efficiency, that I'm stating the obvious, but then it gets fun because we think about the use of vertical space and repurposing furniture. Sometimes that's very comfortable. Those three things all the time when we're doing those designs. And every square foot is important as we think about these things. And this is a tiny house that we have up in New Hampshire. Electric, sewage, I mean, any of the utilities, it's all the same for the ADU, no matter what size. So the expenses associated with that, the excavation, the tie-ins, the permits, etc., it's all there. This is not a great cost savings. In fact, on that front of the tie-ins and the permits, there's no savings. But over the long run, it's less expensive to maintain that tiny house or tiny building. We're, again, thinking about being able to do a lot ourselves, not having to buy a lot of materials to replace things at this scale. From my own experience, as I said, they're pre-qualified. Folks that come to us are already very interested in living a very tiny house lifestyle. And so they happen to also be a contingency of folks who are interested in being off-grid. They would really like to have solar. They have no problem in sharing an organic garden with their, with their residents in the area. They have no problem with sharing a lot of different things, actually, not necessarily living on top of each other, but actually having this sort of community mentality, which fits in well with the cluster housing of smart growth. When we think about having everything nearby, walkable, etc., and also preserving the natural environment because of that, leaving lots of extra open space in the surrounding area. I hate to read what you can read yourself, but misconceptions of the actual cost, we've actually kind of addressed that here. Materials, reduced amount of materials, same cost for utility tie-ins and those sorts of things, though. Less lumber, Problem with the size, people are concerned about reducing the value of their larger homes that are nearby. So this is definitely an issue that comes up quite frequently. Sometimes it's called snob zoning, but there's practical financial reason for being wary, right, of reducing the value of our own homes. And there's a misconception about the buyer for the ones in particular on wheels. These tend to be, or I'll just say my customer base is, rather young, late 20s, 30s, postgraduates, big fat loans, still want affordable housing, have deeply embraced the idea that they won't be staying any one place very, very long for a variety of reasons, socioeconomically these days and where the employment goes these days. So they're not our typical mobile home park socioeconomic basis folks, but the professionals and very highly educated college kids, post-college. They can't afford, college kids can't afford these at all. Okay. So that is concluding this portion, and we're all really happy to take questions. I have a clipboard up there if anyone's interested in getting in touch with me. I do research, I do presentations, and I'm happy to cultivate things on a per-town basis. Getting involved in policy fascinates me, even if I didn't actually design build these things because of my own master's degree, and I'd love to be helpful. So please just come up and sign the board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Isa. Right now, we'd like to open the floor to questions. Remember that we are being recorded and televised so that we can show this presentation to the TV audience. We will, if you raise your hand, we'll have a microphone come to you, And please keep your remarks to under 2 minutes so that everyone has a turn. And thank you. This is Nancy Tavernier. She'll be our microphone lady.
Thanks for your presentation. I wanted to ask...
Can you just say your name?
I'm Ray LeClaire. I live at Two Sandus Trail in Acton, have for a long time.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask a question that was raised during the last planning board meeting regarding the size of a home, an accessory dwelling unit that would be suitable for someone in a wheelchair. So this is directed primarily at Isa because I'd like to know what she thinks the impact on the size of a unit would be by someone who needs to be in a wheelchair.
Thank you for the question. Isa?
I'm smirking because right on the table in front of me is a plan I've been working on for someone in a wheelchair. You're not going to believe this. The building is a tiny house on wheels. It's 8 by 22, and this is accommodating a wheelchair. Having said that, it's very tight, and her living space is very minimal because it is a situation where the main house, the grounds where this will be towed, is her former house where her children live. So, in effect, this is an ADU. Only it won't be tied into the utilities. So I would imagine double that space, and it'd actually be quite comfortable. What's that square? Well, 19 in the interior footprint would be then 21 feet by 7. So 7 times, I'm horrible, but 7 by 21.
Mathematicians?
147. Yeah. And by the way, that's accommodating also 3 cats and 1 small dog.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question here. This is
Oh,
for
your name, sorry.
Sarah Coletti from Willow Street. This is for Ray. I just want to clarify that the zoning requirements, the zoning changes or whatever, ADUs, there won't be any special thing for non-conforming lots? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, we have some people up front here, too.
Hi, I'm Ward Bine. I live at 23 Half Moon Hill. I have 2 questions. One is someone can comment on what in the proposed zoning constitutes a foundation, and why in the proposed amendments it looks like, if I understand this right, that this is only going to allow a unit on a foundation as opposed to on wheels. What was the thinking involved in that, if I read that correctly? If I didn't, please correct me.
Pull it right close to you, Ray.
That's right.
Pull the microphone close.
I mean, quite honestly, a lot of the thinking came from the citizens. I think as a recognition in town, when this came up before, there would be, in my opinion, substantial opposition if we did not say it was on a foundation. So I think it was primarily, that's where it came from. The primary concern was when we had this, when this came up before, there was concerns. Okay, I think this was trying to take that into consideration and not push the envelope too far, to be very honest with you. So as a result, it can always be amended later. From the planning board perspective, it was really being responsive to what the citizens thought they would like to see and what would make sense in the town.
Oh, can you use the microphone? Sorry.
Okay, I'm not a builder. A foundation is a foundation. I'm going to be a little flip here. A foundation is something you have to dig into the ground, and I'm not an engineer or a builder.
Okay, thank you, Roland. It has to conform to the building code as to what a definition of a foundation is.
Nancy, we have
Thank
a
you,
local,
that was a lowly answer, but no, there is current definitions of what a foundation in the building code. And it would have to conform to that building code.
Would you like me to elaborate on the tiny house on wheels?
If you want, go ahead.
Okay, well, no, the tiny house on wheels is rife with complications. And it really needs its own strand of policy development. Because essentially, it's a trailer with a building on it.
Right.
And the trailer is much heavier than a trailer would be, but it gets a plate, it's registered, and it gets a plate, and the building is built on top of it. So having said that, you can just start to imagine all the complications of tying in, for example, into water and septic or sewer. So it's a very different animal.
Okay.
And it's hard to contend with.
thank you. Any more questions?
Hi, Ginger Harris from Acton. I wanted to ask Lori Field, you mentioned that there are communities, I think Boxborough and Maynard, that don't allow rentals, attached units that are rented. So how are they occupied? Are they only occupied by family members in that case, or where you may need someone to work in your home, and so you give them that housing unit to live in? Are there any other explanations?
So both of them allow a family member to occupy, and I can't remember whether one or both of them also allow a caregiver. That's it.
James Snyder Grant. So someone shows up at my neighbor's house in a camper. That's a fine thing to do. At some point, I gather that there's a legal issue. And I'm wondering what's the difference between, someone visiting in a camper and then someone visiting and it, lasts for a year or two. At some point, we're not allowed to have campers, I think, as houses because they'll sound like, units on wheels. So where's the dividing line in the law?
Good question.
I
Ray, do you have the answer?
I could definitely help address that. Because this is
I
one of
don't
the
have the answer.
most
That's I mean, it's a hybrid, like my personal, you're talking about a hybrid situation that's evolving. So I know when we first moved to town, my mother visited us with an RV and was there for a couple of days, so it was parked. So if she stayed for an extended period, I'm sure we would have gotten a call and the Acton police would have visited us saying, we don't want it there. I mean, neighbors, I think there's a self-policing mechanism that takes place.
Yeah.
And then if it becomes a broader issue, we come to town meeting and everything else. Good.
No, I'm listening.
Issa, have you had any
Yeah,
experience
no,
with
it's just,
this?
it's very, yes, I do. Gosh, it's the most common question. So what we're design building is built like a brick you-know-what, and they're incredibly energy efficient. They're not at all like a camper or RV. Having said that, there's no policy around these buildings yet. And as it goes, I'll give you New Hampshire as an example. One of our buildings is in a town where the town just decided to march ahead and tax it as real estate on its per square footage basis, and just went ahead and did that to see if it would float. Well, it's not floating very well. It's a little unfair. But these are the sorts of things that are happening because the towns don't know what to do. So again, it's this, it's in development. It may be years, but right now there's no real good answer. But all I can say, though, is that the buildings that we do, meeting life safety code, for example, and year-round are nothing like a camper or an RV, so.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's
And they don't look it either.
yeah, Jim Willis from Fort Pond Road in Acton. A question for Ray. You've settled on a square footage of 500 square feet, but Aisha said it's between 5 and 6. Is there a reason for discriminating at 500?
I'm glad you asked that question. That came up in our meeting. To be quite candid, it's a placeholder. It was an arbitrary number that came up. That's roughly square footage of 2-car garage. I would encourage you at town meeting, if you want to make an amendment, that number is arbitrary. There was some discussion at our board meeting because there was some hesitation to even bring it forward, and we made the decision, keep it to 500. It's a discussion for town meeting. We could have something that said, right now, the way the current bylaw change is 500 square feet, that's it. We did discuss at our meeting to say anything above 500 square feet up to a limitation would be by special permit. We could not get our board to agree, so we made the decision, go forward. That's an amendment that can be made at town meeting. So it was totally arbitrary. Where it did come from was the 2-car garage was kind of a footprint, so you can visualize what it might be.
Well, then the second part of the question is, Aisha, how well do tiny houses fit into that? What percentage of the tiny houses that you see or take part in building would fit into the 500 square feet?
Well, this isn't a call to action, as they say, it's not a sales pitch, but honestly, most of what we're doing, because we're not going to send out crews all over New England, we serve New England, it would be unaffordable for us to do that. So the design work for something on a foundation would be just that, no build, just design. So in that case, 500 or 600 square feet doesn't make any difference, we'll do that.
Okay.
I've done 900, but that's not tiny anymore.
David Hahn, 105 School Street. If you have a detached, currently in the code, if you have a detached building, like a barn, and you want to put a ADU in it, they make you design it to be handicapped accessible or convertible to be handicapped accessible, which I can tell you because I'm laying one out now next to a barn. I'm trying to get next to my property. It really increases the size of the unit quite a bit if you start, the bathroom's a lot bigger. The kitchen can't be a galley kitchen. You got to be able to spin around. The pathways are bigger because you've got to have 18 inches on a pull side of a door, so on and so on and so forth. So obviously I can do it in the thing I'm doing, but my question is, for this 500 square foot new detached building, since people who like me have to make our units handicap accessible, is that part of this, that if you do a detached 500 square foot building, it has to be handicap accessible or be able to be converted to that? Is that part of the?
I believe the answer is yes. All the existing, it doesn't change anything with the existing bylaw. It doesn't say if you do a detached, you're exempt. You have to abide by all the other existing requirements, including.
Oh, I see. Okay, so it falls under the same language as detached.
The only change, exactly.
Yeah.
So anything someplace still applies.
Yeah.
We're just saying the only difference, if you really boil it down to simplicity, is you're allowing to have a detached unit and it doesn't have to be attached to the house.
Right. Okay.
Anything else that's in the bylaw still applies.
Okay. Yeah. So what I'm saying is, I think 500 is pretty skimpy, frankly.
Again, I don't disagree. I don't want to get into a debate at this forum.
Yeah.
I do want to emphasize for those people interested, it's important to come to town meeting. We struggled as a board, to be quite candid with you, and I think the reason this moved forward is there was strong citizen support. I encourage you to come to town meeting and make an amendment from the floor to say, this doesn't make sense, or whatever other appropriate language. I think that would be the right place. For those of you who came to our meeting, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, also, I do want to say for people who may not know that the town meeting begins April 1st, Monday, April 1st at 7 p.m. at the Acton Boxborough Regional High School
And that's
auditorium.
not an April Fool's.
It's not. Thank Thank you, Ray. Okay, question?
Tara Fredericks of West Acton. I'm so excited. I want to talk to you afterwards. I want to talk to you about foundations and making it mobile and foundations, something like that. I would love for Acton to step up and have a tiny house parking area. I have 2 friends that are living in one and one that's building them, and their biggest problem is, where do we bring them? How can we get a parking space? So that's a really huge issue. I want to ask a question.
Tara, excuse me, we want to
Yes.
hear you, so hold the
I want
microphone
to
close.
ask a question. How many votes did this lose by last time? Does anybody know how close was it? It was not close. Okay, so
I don't think it was, remember, we needed 2/3.
Yeah, I know.
I think it may have gotten a majority. I feel compelled to mention it was at a special town meeting, late in the meeting, so I don't think got an appropriate airing, and it wasn't, if I had to do over, I would say, do not take zoning to special town meetings. It was about the senior center, and it was late, and it got derailed, so I think that's why this discussion this time, I felt as from the planning board, it was important to go forward because we were hearing from the citizens.
Okay, 'cause
That was very strongly say, take it to town meeting. So that's why we're presenting at town
thank you.
meeting.
I was one of the petitioners that put the petition together so that we would get the plan, because we were hearing from planning department staff that they were not going to bring it forward. So my next question is about the towns, the magic thing. Thank you for all that data. I'd like that. How many of the towns in the magic area require a special permit? Because I feel like if we had a special permit requirement on this, it would pass easy. The fact that it doesn't have a special permit, I'm worried.
Let me address that.
Oh,
Okay. I think the issue that the board struggled with is special permits are very onerous and very expensive, both to the applicant as well as to the town. This was a decision of where do you go with government overreach. The popular thing is make everything a special permit because we can say yes or no to everything. It's impractical. So as a board, we said, for something this size, why should we have to make you come in for a special permit, just to say we can be arbitrary and capricious? So it's a balance. So we said, this makes good government sense that it's by right. To make it a special permit is bad government. That's quite honestly what we decided. That's why where the larger units, et cetera, where it would make sense, where there's an existing structure, where there's a lot of different variables, in those circumstances, the board said, yeah, those, because we can't answer all the questions, should be a special permit. So that was our thinking behind it. I think it's important because I think a lot of people hide behind special permits, saying, and this came up at our hearing, until a citizen finds out, oh my God, you're going to make me do what? Never mind. So we heard that at our hearing, saying, this is insanity. Why should I have to do this? And I think we were listening to the citizens. So to answer your question, it's balance. We took that into consideration and very deliberately said to make it special permit is overreach and would defeat the purpose of, a lot of people say, never mind. So if you want to encourage it, it's a balance.
My 2 minutes, I still have a couple more
Thank you,
comments. Because Newton is getting 12 a year, and they have a special permit requirement, and so I just worry that this isn't going to pass. I think I'm going to try an amendment from the floor. Thank you for the Asbury Grove comment. We missed the last opening. We're going to buy one of those. And so my last comment has to do with the great neighborhoods, smart growth, housing choice. I believe that those bills will be fueling evictions. There's no protection for people who are most vulnerable, and those are the people getting thrown out of their houses for these smart growth proposals. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could respond to the last point, our agenda does include anti-displacement legislation, including right to counsel for eviction.
It's not the same bill.
No, that's correct.
Please remember to speak loudly and slowly so everyone can hear. Can people hear in the back, by the way? Okay, great. Go ahead.
I have 2 questions.
Franny, say your name.
Franny Osman. One question is, what's required when you go for a special permit? And the second is, what process should we go by if we think it's important to make it bigger than 500 square feet? We wouldn't want to wait till we're on the floor of town meeting and then say, how do we do this? what process should we be doing between now and town meeting to plan for an amendment to make it
Big
bigger?
question.
And actually, I'll ask
sorry.
I have a third question, actually, I realized, is I don't think it sounds like that's typical. I sort of agree with what Ray said about the size needed for a wheelchair, or whoever said it.
Oh, no, it's not at all. This is a really.
That sounds unusual.
Yeah, it's a special circumstance, but I tried to talk her up, but she insisted that this particular person, that she'd be spending a lot of living time in the main house.
Right.
But having doubled the space to 500 square feet, actually, that's more than double, isn't it? But up to 500, it would have been really comfortable, you know.
Okay,
so meeting all of the requirements.
But I don't get the feeling from hearing about it and from having lived in an 800 square foot apartment that it would be easy to have a wheelchair accessible at 500 square feet. And so you're probably getting lost of my questions.
Yeah, why don't we have Ray answer the first
first
question,
two,
like
and then
one
I'll
question at a
clarify the
time?
Let me give you some context on at least from a personal context on accessibility. My daughter-in-law is in a wheelchair. She lives in a 800 square foot apartment in Brookline, so it can't be done. So I mean, they're spacious. I'm very familiar with that. First question, you said, special permit. Special permit is what it implies. What we're talking here is we either provide within the bylaws what's referred to as by right, which means if you comply with all of the bylaws and rules and regulations, you have the right to do this. So from a process standpoint, that means they can go to the planning department, they do their building permit, the planning department says either you do or don't comply with zoning. If you comply with zoning, by right, you can go do it. Special permit says no. You got to go to the board, and you have to say, may I, and you have to go through a much more rigorous process. It's much longer, it's much more expensive. That's primarily the difference, okay? So that, wrong, am I misspeaking at all? I just want to make sure but that's really, from a simplicity standpoint, one is you have to, and the board that is reviewing that process can basically.
We'll bring it back to you, don't worry.
Franny. And the other difference is it gives the board latitude. There's no rules. So really, and this is the flip side, the board can say, for this decision, we're going to make up the rules. And so it's unpredictable from the standpoint of the applicant. You want to clarify or correct my
Yeah,
statement?
I also want to make sure we're answering the right questions. Are you asking about, are there fees, or what's the process, or?
I just wanted to know what a special permit entails.
Okay.
So, yes, there's
Roland Bartle is our town planning director.
there's typically a fee involved. It can range from several $100s to several $1,000s. I don't know what it would be for this case because there's not a special permit proposed. There would be a public hearing involved, notice to abutters. There are wait times. When you add it all up, you add at least 3 months to the permitting process on top of before you can apply for a building permit. And then you go through the building permit routine. So but it can be longer depending on how busy the board is. Can I say one thing about handicapped accessibility?
Yes.
We checked the building code to do a bathroom that's wheelchair accessible with a shower. You need about 75 square feet. And if you add a bathtub, you need a little more, but that's 75 square feet. So we took that as one indicator of whether the 500 square foot for the total unit would be adequate or not.
Okay, thank you. Franny, did you want to finish your question? And we want to get to everyone, so.
So I had a question, and you could answer it afterward, but it's what we should do between now and then. And also, if we wanted it bigger, the way it's worded right now, it doesn't say if you want it bigger, you can go to a special permit. Does that mean we can go to a special permit, or do we have no choice?
Yeah, okay. I think the constituencies out there need to think about it. If you were at our meeting, one of our discussion was to add language that we just said, and above 500, but no more than 1,000 square feet by a special permit. the board couldn't agree. That doesn't take a lot of planning. If that's something that the people who are interested thinks makes sense, that's why I decided as chairman, we weren't going to get anywhere that night. That's a town meeting. I don't think that involves planning. I think that's something, because that provides the town with the protection. You say, okay, 500 by right. You don't have to do, if you're going to do something substantially bigger, the town has a vested interest in putting you through that special permit process.
Yeah, and I think the last question was, how do you go about making an amendment on town meeting floor? Do you want to speak with someone after about that? Can you answer that?
You used to be chair of the Board of Selectmen. You're probably better qualified to answer that question than I am.
Well, my guess, and this is a guess, would be to approach the moderator and say that you might be planning to make an amendment on town meeting floor, and then the moderator might, with the town manager, refer you to town council to help you craft something that would be legal. But I would do it in advance. It's very difficult and holds up the whole town meeting if you're trying to do it on town meeting floor.
Hello, I'm Shauna Wilkinson. So I have a couple of questions now, but first a comment. I think this is fantastic. It is necessary, needed, and I'm
Can you hold the microphone closer to your mouth? I'm sorry.
so glad that it seems like the idea of it is being embraced. There are two population. Well, there's more than two populations: people with financial restrictions, the elderly or aging population, as well as the kids that are coming home from college, having difficult times finding jobs, but have been independent for 4 years and don't want to come back under your roof. And then there's also people with disabilities. I will include myself being mostly blind. I also have concerns about the square footage because if we consider the persons or people that are moving into these dwellings, there's a big difference between one person and then two. Given the constraints of a 500 square foot dwelling that has to be handicap accessible, I just have some questions around that. And then just a clarification quickly, you had said that up to 800 square feet or percentage of the primary dwelling already on site. So is it just 500 square foot like outright, or is it based off the percentage of the size of the home?
Okay, Ray, can you answer that?
Yeah, the 800, the percentage we were just playing with, that's the current bylaw. The 500 is part of the proposed amendment. There's obviously potential inconsistency there that should be looked at. So it's right now is if you are doing an attached unit, it's based on up to 800 square feet and a percentage.
Oh, so
It's
attached.
detached.
Okay.
This is the only change that we're proposing in this bylaw is to allow detached, and for detached, that's where the 500 feet being in.
Okay, thank you. I was confused about that.
Thank you. That's where that number came from.
So that means carriage houses and barns are still okay to convert?
By special permit.
By special permit.
So I just have a quick question. So understanding that tiny homes can be very simple or they can be very extravagant given the materials that you choose and for the inside, the exterior and interior. What would you say the average tiny home price that's decent looking and around the 500 square foot range would cost? And I am giving you some lead here in terms of like the decorative arches. I could see that, and it was very ornate and pretty, and also would increase the price. So I was just curious.
Yeah.
Okay, Isa?
Well, it's very much like for example, the cost of the smallest manufactured home, which after you've done the excavation and everything, is no longer that cheap because of the excavation and the, and all the tie-ins, et cetera. So, probably it would be fair to say 120 to 130, but that's a far cry from a $500,000, right?
So I have thank you.
Yeah.
I have one more question.
Yeah, I think we'll have to make it quick. Are there any other questions in the audience? We're shutting down at 9.
It's
So
very,
we have one more. Go ahead.
It's very quick. When you're speaking about amendments, if I were to say make an investment of over $100,000 on a tiny home for my property, for let's say my daughter or maybe an elderly relative that may end up moving, to with another.
That's not for you, don't worry.
Member of our family or whatever, could there be a special provision around the foundation so that it didn't look like it was sitting on a trailer?
That's a building code issue.
Okay, so who would I?
That's a building code. See, that's where it's not a planning, it's not a bylaw, that's a building code.
Okay.
Yeah, but you can talk to the town planner afterwards.
Okay,
and
thank you.
He might be able to tell you more.
Harriet McMahon from Acton. I'm very appreciative of all the work that has gone on with the board and other people here. This is my first foray into this. And my question is really a future question. I don't think it's as important as everything else we've talked about. But I noticed in that slide about the state laws that at the state level there are proposals for laws for within the building, not detached or attached. If I read correctly, that there may also be a future which a unit could be created within a building. Did anyone else?
Larry, do you want to get that?
Yeah, so Acton right now, by right, if you conform to all the particulars, you can do an ADU within the main structure. So that's all that we're talking about there. This particular legislation is not proposing the most liberal provisions for ADUs. It is designed to create basically a floor where every municipality would allow ADUs within the main structure with certain requirements. And then if they want to do more than that, if they want to do detached, if they want to have special provisions for that are more liberal than in this statute, they would be able to do that.
It's another structure. So the assessor would come in and say, okay, you got this many square feet, it's improved, it's and you get a tax bill for it. So there's nothing new or separate in the current bylaw when it comes to taxing or how it's taxed, and there's nothing new or changed with this one.
Okay, thank you. Well, I want to thank our speakers, presenters very much, and thank all of you for your great questions and your involvement. And please, if you would like to follow up with any of the speakers, you can come up and speak with them and sign Issa's sheet there to get more information. And we really appreciate the interest. It was really nice to see this really great turnout. And I hope that you will come to town meeting and see how it's all going. So thank you very much and have a wonderful evening.
What do I do now? Oh.